Welcome back to the Flow Performance Podcast. My name is Ricky Dan, founder of Flow Nutrition and your host. On today's episode, we have Daniel Moffatt Martin answering the question, what's the go with long-term athlete development? Now, Dan is an accredited exercise scientist and a strength and conditioning coach from Newcastle. I first came across Dan from his previous business, To The Edge. He essentially created an athlete training center that was mostly for action and adventure sport athletes. Now, I literally used to have pictures of his high performance center up on my vision board during my undergrad studies as something that I dreamt of building and creating one day. He has been a role model of mine for quite a while now, and I have so much respect for the work he has done and is currently doing. Today, though, he's moved on from the business and is currently a self-employed exercise scientist and strength and conditioning coach, whilst also studying a master's in clinical exercise physiology at Charles Stuart University. He is an ASCA Level 2 professional S&C coach who has worked with a wide range of action sport athletes, from juniors right through to the world's best like Julian Wilson and Wright. On top of this, he is also a recognised performance provider with Surfing Australia and Redbull athletes. In this episode, Dan answers the question, what's the go with long-term athlete development? He explains what the LTAD framework is and the different stages involved in the process. We also discuss the importance of fostering positive training environments for kids and the pros and cons of early specialisation versus participation in a variety of sports for youth development. This episode is especially important for parents and coaches, particularly those who are working with young kids and wanting to enhance their enjoyment in sport. Now, just a reminder, if you find this episode valuable, don't hesitate to drop it a 5-star rating, share it with a mate, or post it up on your Instagram story and tag the Flow Performance Podcast. So let's get into it. Here is What's the Go with Long-Term Athlete Development with Daniel Moffatt Martin. Welcome back to the Flow Performance Podcast. My name is Ricky Dan, founder of Flow Nutrition. Today, I am down in Newcastle at Merriweather Beach on a very windy day with the one and only Daniel Moffatt Martin. Mate, how are we doing?
Good, thanks, buddies.
Very good. Today's training-related question is, what's the go with long-term athlete development, or LTAD for any other strength and conditioning coaches out there? I think this is such an important training consideration that probably isn't spoken enough about. So for those out there who aren't aware of what the model is, can you give us a quick explanation just in general of what it actually is?
Yeah, so the LTAD model, like you said, is basically a framework that they've identified as essentially like a pathway from very early, say very early child development all the way through to young adolescents, and it's a stages of training, so to speak, where they're basically using that framework to identify at each given point of development for the youth population what's the key areas they should be focusing on. So obviously there's very, very different skill sets and things that a 5 to 7 year old needs that a 19 to 20 year old needs. So yeah, basically that long-term athlete development model is that framework where coaches and practitioners, clinicians can sort of follow the recommendations and the guidelines for each given point in time of that framework, so that we understand what's the best thing that we should be focusing on at this point of development or maturation.
Yeah, I feel like it's becoming a lot more prevalent in sort of traditional sports now. They're implementing it a little bit more, but I haven't really seen much at all in action and adventure sports. Like, I don't see a poster of LTAD up on a surfing bloody sand dune or anything. Like, have you been exposed to any sort of stuff in the action sport world when it comes to this?
No, which is, I guess, like it's a blessing and a curse for me, because I see this area where so much work needs to be done, and it hasn't really started to, I guess, fall over into the action sports world where they're identifying specific recommendations or guidelines for people sort of following the non-mainstream sports. But that excites me because it leaves a real window of opportunity for trailblazers and people that are very passionate about it to sort of really dive into it. So yeah, it haven't seen it yet, but stay tuned. I think there's a lot of work that that we can potentially do in this space that there's going to have a big impact.
Bloody oath. And so I understand there are different stages. So you said it's predominantly sort of young adults this is sort of targeting. Do you know off the top of your head the different stages and sort of like the age brackets at all with what the...
I haven't glanced at it for a little while, but yeah, so the stages basically go from what they call like fundamentals, with emphasis on fun. And, realistically that doesn't need to start in like anywhere particular. We usually see, that stuff starting to happen, early primary school, things like that. So anywhere from, 5 years old and things like that. You've got obviously gross motor development and things going on there, but sort of, anywhere from sort of, that 5-6 years old, upwards through generally till about 8 or 9, I think. But realistically, it also comes down to a competency thing as well. So it's not just because, a kid turns 8 that you automatically move to the next bracket. There are different elements in terms of competency that also assist with unlocking that next level and sort of what the theme is. So yeah, it starts off in the fundamental stage, and then there's like the learning to train stage, I believe, from memory, and then training to train, and then so basically working all the way up through training to compete, and then training to win. So I'm pretty sure that's roughly the model that sort of it follows. So realistically, that timeline and those themes realistically follow, again, what should be normal development and should be where a certain age bracket, should fall on if they've been developing normally in terms of, okay, now we've developed a certain level of movement skills, movement competency, hormonal changes, things like that are going to realistically allow the child to basically move into another phase, which, as you can see from sort of fundamentals up to training, to win, training to compete, training to win, it's a very, very, very different, way that person will be preparing themselves.
But it also just sounds like it just means they're going to have a good relationship with physical activity and sport. Like that, in my mind, is the most important thing. Like,
absolutely.
You still see those parents out there and they have their 8-year-old in the train to win category. And it's like, come on, man. Like, it's called fundamentals for a reason. Like, just let them go and have fun. And so I think that sort of framework also just allows them to foster that healthy, positive relationship with sport.
For sure. And at the end of the day, it doesn't matter what level the child is at in terms of how well they can do that activity or sport. At the end of the day, we all do sport and physical activity for health and for fun, right? Whether, and I think the sporting parent and things like that can, that's a whole different topic, but that's...
Actually, have you read the book, The Sporting Parent?
No, was that Nathan Parnham's one? No, I haven't yet, but I know Nathan's been doing some great work in that space and really sort of... putting a lot of time and energy into that, which I'm stoked about, and really grateful for someone that's also passionate in this area as well. So I haven't read Nathan's book yet, but
even just his Instagram, for those out there, give him a follow. He puts some really good stuff out there. But it also seems like this whole topic needs to be tailored to the parents. It's not the kids that need to learn this stuff. It's the parents, because they're the ones and the coaches, right, enforcing it. But we just spoke about before, it's something you're very passionate about, and you hope one day you could maybe do some research around it. Like, what in particular are you super interested about it? Like, where would you sort of pursue? Is there a certain avenue? What would you sort of look at?
For me, when I have a look at the sort of the traditional, long-term athlete development models, like our, basically like the LTAD model, there's Boyle's model, different things like that. If you look at more the governing guidelines are in sort of the health space, so looking outside of sport and into just general health development, they actually have another model called FMS, not the, functional movement screen, but the fundamental movement skills. And when you have a look at what their framework is, it's actually very different from, the fundamentals, training to train, that type of thing. And they actually talk about things like, okay, within different stages of development, they want to go through, okay, can the child, walk, run, skip, move laterally, throw, kick, hit a stationary ball, hit a striking ball, like very, very objective, skills. Right, and so that is what outside of sport they recommend. So there's still, I think, a real mismatch between how we're looking at developing a child, whether they're playing sport or whether they're just, moving for quality life, which either way we need, so we need to still make sure that, okay, the foundation is we're moving, we're healthy, we're developing a very healthy relationship around movement and sport. Those are the keystones, doesn't matter what bucket you're looking at. But where I'm really interested in is when looking at youth athletes, are we still taking into consideration the general developmental milestones and foundations that need to be laid, or are we just training kids and children to be very good athletes when they're 18, 19? So to put, like, I guess, a picture and a visualization on that, when you get an 8-year-old, or say like 8 or 10-year-old in the gym, it's their very first introduction to the gym work. The way that most people are being trained to write programs for youth athletes is like, okay, well, we know that ultimately we want them to be able to squat, hinge, push, pull, lunge, move in these ways. And so we give them, very sort of novel and elementary versions of much more advanced exercises. So they might start off doing a bodyweight squat and a goblet squat, move them to, a front rack squat into a back squat, different things like that, because we want them to be proficient, in these movements when they're older. But if you take a step back, not one part of the rationale there was, okay, what does this 8 to 10-year-old need right now developmentally? So I started looking at things, different ways of, viewing child development, and youth development from different medical models, and coming across dynamic neuromuscular stabilization, the DNS model. Realistically, the principles of that is all to do with optimizing trunk stability, optimizing breathing mechanics, optimizing joint centration. But essentially, we look at the first 12 months of development from newborn, into the first 12 months and then beyond. And what are the natural milestones that, say, a newborn will realistically go through if we're looking at normal neural development. So, from newborn to different hand postures, different reflexes that we should see start to dissipate, rolling over, normal breathing mechanics, all the different milestones from a newborn pose up to walking. And when we have a look at that, we understand, okay, there's a certain way that this baby and this child is supposed to develop. And we don't teach that baby that. It shows us when it's ready and when the nervous system matures. So we obviously have a look at normal breathing mechanics in terms of diaphragmatic breathing, making sure that there's adequate intra-abdominal pressure, stabilizes the trunk, stabilizes the spine, and then we start to see more advanced, neural motor development happen from there. And so when I have a look at these youth athletes coming in 10, 11, 12, and they're going through these different growth spurts, and there's been a lot of research on peak height velocity and different things like that, but having a look at, say, a 12 or 13-year-old who can't lift their arms above their head, junior surfers come in, screen them on their breathing. Their deep breathing is basically all shallow in the chest. They're not able to actually create that same intra-abdominal pressure, so their breathing mechanics are out, all of their movements are out. Their squat, they have that, obviously in anterior pelvic tilt and, knee valgus, different things like that. A lot of, TL junction loss and things like that when they're trying to go into, say, like lifting their arms over their head in overhead flexion. All of these, what we would consider dysfunctional but, quite normal movement patterns for these kids because of just where they're at developmentally. And so when we then come into terms of, okay, well, this 12-year-old surfer who, is looking to, progress their training, start some training, they're doing really well and starting to compete at a high level, yada, yada, yada. You basically then have a look at this kid and what normal research and normal LTAD models tell us is, okay, well, this kid should be learning how to train, or learning how to train, sorry. So they're learning early versions of squats and hinges and stuff, but this kid needs to learn how to stabilize his spine. He needs to learn how to stabilize his hips. And not that you can't do that stuff in an integrated way with normal training. We do. Like my athletes still, we squat, we learn all those different things. But what I'm very, very interested in is integrating some of these medical models into our more sporting sides so that the main questions that were being asked immediately when this child comes in is, what does this child need right now for where they are developmentally and where they're heading, not what does this child need to learn in order to give me a very proficient back squat or clean or something like that when he's 18, 19. So that's where I view youth development, and potentially like not so much like a brand new way of training kids, but like just understanding that this is a child who is in the middle of a lot of physical change. What do they need from us as S&C coaches, exercise scientists, EPs, physios? What do they need from us right now to help them through that developmental process, rather than what do they need from us right now so they'll be proficient athletes when they're 18? That's where I sort of view things a bit differently.
Well, mate, if you want to do your PhD there, it sounds like there's a lot of unanswered questions. Bloody hell. And that would be a perfect PhD. You could firstly just look at like what similarities are there, how closely linked are these two sort of frameworks, and then you could implement some sort of like combination, or how do you integrate A with B, and then even providing this knowledge to regular coaches and parents, like, because I feel like the majority of young athletes don't have access to EPs or the physios or the sports scientists. So it's like, how can we communicate these messages to the dad who just wants to take his son down to cricket training and play tennis, and like, should I just make him specialise in cricket so he plays for Australia? Or like, I don't think that is communicated very well at the moment. So how we address that, I don't know.
Yeah, it's a tough one, because parents, like being a parent, myself now, is like, all you ever want for your child is the best. You just want them to achieve everything they want, achieve their dreams, reach their potential, be happy, all of those things. And so, yeah, parents again, can be very. It's a really hard job to sort of do what's best by your child, and also do what's best, that research tells us. And there's so much information out there, so much, early specialisation versus, late specialisation, and there's different athletes that have had success on both ends of the scale. Like they use like the Tiger Woods theory and the Roger Federer theory, and
Then you have your Agassi theory. Have you read his book?
No.
Oh, okay. He didn't have a good relationship with tennis. He was very forced into it, and so yeah, there's both ends of that spectrum. I personally feel like the reason that I can sort of pick up any sport at the moment is because I had such a diverse range when I was young, and I love that fact that I didn't specialise into one early on.
Yeah.
But yeah, you're right. There's cases for either side, but is there anything like that in the model already? Early specialisation, is that a consideration that is in the?
I think, to my knowledge, to my current knowledge, there's not sort of research pointing, okay, directly this is the best way to do it. I think there's definitely rationale as to, okay, both in terms of, say, like a motor development and more of like a skill acquisition. So if we're looking at sort of like general physical development, late specialisation, play as many different sports as you can in different planes of motion, team sports and individual sports, so you're learning different skill sets really. That one really appeals to me, in obviously now you sort of know how I view, youth development. But yeah, I think, the research that kind of does point to the early specialisation, realistically what their rationale probably more is geared towards is, more motor skill acquisition in terms of that refining very specific motor skills to allow that individual to just reach such a mastery level in that very specific skill set, i.e., golf. 8-year-olds that do nothing but golf from the time that they're 8.
They don't consider the mindset aspect of that comes along with potentially getting tired very quickly of doing the same thing every day. But I think that's one of the advantages of the action and adventure sport communities. Like surfers, they skate, they snowboard. Like naturally, I think they just gravitate towards this. I just want to do anything that gives me this sort of flow state feeling.
Yes.
And I feel like that's what I love about action and adventure sports. Like, I would love to just go. Like, I don't do much BMX stuff, but I want to give it a crack. Whereas traditional sports, you're a tennis player, you're a golfer. Very rarely do you see that sort of mix.
Yeah. And honestly, that actually was a huge realization of mine, is what is the difference between someone that chooses to follow a mainstream sport versus branching off into the action sports, and that's actually how I think I differ in terms of, say, a coach or a practitioner who does potentially have a little bit more experience in these sides, is because I sat down and I asked myself, why does this person do what they do in terms of, say, like play football or whatever like that? And honestly, the way that I coach, the way that I program, the way that I train, it realistically comes down to this individual does these action sports because this is who they are. They started off doing something that they loved, which was a hobby, which, an outlet. It was a freedom of expression. It was an art form potentially. Like when you listen to interviews of, the best action sports athletes in the world, they never started off thinking I'm going to be a professional ... right? They just did it. They did it because they loved it. The feeling it gave them, the freedom. They could express who they were if they were a bit of a bit of an outsider type, personality type at school.
Yeah, back in the day, they were all rebellious, right? They were the ones going out there rebelling, and that was their way of just not fitting into the norms, right?
Yeah.
It's what they love to do. And
when it comes to training and programming those types of individuals, that's the first thing I take in mind is like if I start programming things that are very, monotonous and, programming how I'd train a normal mainstream sport athlete, I'm going to lose them. And I learned that through my early career trying to do the best that, normal S&C and research and things like that got into was I'm slowly losing these guys because they're if they wanted to do very straight down the line, linear periodized, long-term, programs to saturate XYZ qualities, things like that, they would have done football, soccer, tennis, which was very regimented, very clinical. They're out there in dynamic environments just chasing that feeling, so yeah, that's probably a bit of a different topic, but that's where I see...
That topic is my PhD. That's exactly what I'm looking at, is the ecological dynamics approach to training, and not stuffing with their... the flexibility around training, and that's because you're not going to give them a bloody rowers plan. You get up at 4 every morning, you need to do your workout. It's like
no. One of my most successful athletes, Rhiannon Iflin, Red Bull cliff diver. She started off as an aquatic diver, normal regimented diving, and got to a very high level and just went, bugger this, I am so sick of turning up to the pool and doing the same thing. So went to cliff diving. I think she's up to 8 or 9 world titles. We've been together for 5 or 6 of those, and that's who she is. And when we hang out, everything has to still come back to who is this individual and why do they do what they do. And it's very different, and that's what I love about it. And to tie that into our LTAD stuff here is when I have a group of 4 or 5 junior surfers or junior motocross riders or whatever like that, man, they are a handful in the gym. That 1 hour with them feels like 3, but it's so fun, compared to I've got, a group of junior soccer players or whatever like that. And the dynamic in the room is so different because, at the end of the day, they're all still, the same age, the same kids, and they still love having fun. So I make it fun. But yeah, it's very, very different how I approach the LTAD development for the young junior action sports athletes, because they're just still in that thrill-seeking mode. Everything, they want to get competitive and challenge each other. They want to feel like you're giving them something that is very, very familiar in terms of their sport as well. So if I give them an exercise or a movement or something that they just can't grasp the context with, how is this going to help my surfing or mountain biking or BMX or whatever like that, then not that we make it extremely specific, they're not bringing their boards in and practice paddling on the ground, but going through the process with them, educating them, we're doing this movement which is going to help with this, then that's going to help you with that, and then when you're out in the arena doing XYZ, this is where you're going to see it play out, and they really tap into that. But they also just love the dynamic challenges, and we'll have off the script sessions come in every now and then where it's just okay, the last 2 or 3 weeks we've been doing this week, whether it's sort of your normal delayed week if you're programming, I guess still traditional. You still use traditional frameworks and what we know it works, but you've got to have that interface of it's still reading into sort of who they are and why they do that sport. So yeah, they'll come in, we'll do an off the script session where it's just a lot more personal challenges and little cognitive tasks and things like that, and they just love that because they're just little thrill seekers, and it's just, I love working with them.
I love that too, mate. And what you're doing is just taking the individual into account, right? Because that's, I feel like as exercise scientists or strength and conditioning coaches, we can get lost in the perfect program. It needs to be this and that, and all the numbers around the sets and the reps, and making these perfect things and not taking into account, is this athlete going to want to do this? Does this fit into their lifestyle? And so even when I reflect over, I still do a lot of teaching currently at university. We very rarely teach that to the new grads coming through as well. It's all about how to make the perfect program, but it's the perfect program may not work for a surfer who just goes, actually, no, I don't want to do that. Well, now what? It's like you need to be able to adapt to the culture of each sport, the environment they're within, and this model definitely allows that, especially in those really vulnerable, important ages as young adults. So
yeah, the perfect program is the one that gets done and completed week in, week out, right? You can have the most rationalized science, evidence-based program on paper. But at the end of the day, if it doesn't get done, it's still not going to be effective. So, the best program is the one that's engaged with and is completed safely and, consistently over the long term, realistically. So, and that's where I look at it. And all the basic principles still are relevant, but especially with the new grads and things like that, is you've got to learn everything in the box in order to think outside the box. So you've got to have your sound principles and understand that, and have your rationalised, reasoning for why you're doing X, Y, Z, and how that's going to lead to this and that. And so, you've got to understand what's in the box in order to think outside it. But I think
I love that analogy. I've never heard that.
No, I think I might have stole that off Eric Cressy. So thanks, Eric. But it's something that that's I guess a little bit of my philosophy. I've always thought like that. I guess one of my coaching principles is, even when I very, very early days, the way that I think is, okay, I understand that that's how it's always been done, but how do we do it better? And so I always gravitate to the thinking outside the box stuff. But still have gone through university, gone through all of my ASCA qualifications, gone through the right channels in order to get my accreditations, but I still never have and never will lose that curiosity for, okay, again, I understand this is how we've always done it and this is where we've got to, but how do we do it better? And that's where I sort of, that's just my day-to-day thinking of just pure curiosity of, how do I help this individual get to where they want to get to, and how do we move the needle on human performance.
I like that. Well, your understanding of what's in the box allows you to ask those good questions, to be curious on what's outside the box.
Yeah.
That's the difference between you and just any idiot that could just ask any random question. Oh, why aren't you doing squats out in the water? It's like you need that fundamental knowledge first to answer or ask those really critical questions to move that needle, right? And because there's so much of that on social media, you just see these people that don't have the foundation knowledge. They just do these silly things with no justification, and it's like, okay, it looks like that. Do they? Yeah, it's just hard to sort of know why. Why are they doing that? And I like your approach there. That's
thank
reassuring.
You. It's and especially working with youth athletes, it's so critical, right? Because realistically, what they need at certain times of that maturation and development is they need very solid foundations in order to give them a platform to then go and do whatever they want to do, and not only be good at it but just be safe doing it, right? They need a lot of foundations, and a lot of the stuff with DNS is basically coming right back to breathing mechanics and optimizing trunk stability, because you can go through you can go through say a short-term 4-6 week program or something like that, just optimizing breathing mechanics and trunk stability and integrating that into just very basic motor patterns, and then retest anyone. This is just human physiology and applied biomechanics. And so if you optimize those basic functions, you will increase strength, you will increase power, you will increase range of motion, you will increase endurance through economy, which is basically most of the buckets in terms of what we're trying to do in sports performance, just by optimizing the basics. And for kids, that's what they need most of. And so when someone comes in and watches me train a group of youth athletes, whatever, and we're working on these basic things and it doesn't look that fancy or whatever, but then these kids can go out and do amazing things and just keep doing that and always getting better and better. And we're still integrating, traditional S&C stuff in with it at the right time if it's relevant for them. But it's amazing what you can do just optimizing the basics. And that's where DNS and those types of things really, really hold strong in youth development for me. So that's where I kind of want to see the medical models and the sports performance models start to integrate in terms of, okay, I understand that, this youth athlete wants to train for this sport or these couple of sports, and they've got goals around rep teams and state and, being professional at it. But what does this 10-year-old need right now in order to get to the next level of maturation safely? So that's where I want to do some work and try and integrate those models.
I love that. And if there's any professors out there looking to bring on a student for a PhD or wants to supervise anyone to do more research, I want you to pursue that, mate, because that is an area I think
I don't know if my wife does.
So maybe part-time PhD. It only takes you like 10 years. But what an interesting area, mate. I really hope we can learn more about that just in general, whether someone else looks into that, because integrating that medical model into sports science, I think that, good question to ask to start with. That's talking about that inside, outside box thinking. That's a really good question to ask. How can we integrate that? Is there anywhere listeners can sort of like learn more about both models? Is there some like online resource or anywhere you'd sort of direct them to learn more about DNS, probably specifically?
Like just looking at like the DNS Australia website, and you'll see Inga Vladson, one of my mentors, like heavily runs that here in Australia, and there's a bunch of different courses for practitioners and athletes, from basic courses, DNS A course, right through to very, very advanced training courses, but even just a general understanding on sort of what DNS is about. But even, outside of that, sort of the normal LTAD models, like there's a whole lot of research and even government pages and things like that. So, I think like New South Wales Health have a lot of information on the fundamental movement stuff that we talked about, like the hop, skip, jump, throw type sort of models. So there's lots of general information out there. But I think especially for other coaches or practitioners or people working with youth athletes, dive over to the DNS Australia website and have a little bit of a look at what it's about. I think it will it'll resonate with a lot of people once they actually understand how applied this is and how important it is. But
Epic, mate. Yeah, and before this chat, I had a quick little refresher on the LTAD model, and literally, if you just Google it in there, there's so much research and stuff around it. So would highly recommend, if there's any sort of young parents out there getting their kids into sport, like such a valuable thing, just to have a quick read over and just understand the concepts anyway. So
for sure, especially for parents understanding, potentially if they are looking a bit too far down the line in terms of, I think I've got, my 10-year-old, I think is the next Tiger Woods or Messi or something.
To hear, right? So I can totally see where they're coming from.
And it comes from love, like it seriously does. But I think, for 100%, like it's very easy to actually sort of pull back and then, take a 360-degree view, on the situation once you understand those models and go, oh, relax, we've got a long way to go. Make sure the kid's having fun first, and they've got it. It has to be a very healthy relationship with it, like you said. And I think for the parents, investigating more, that's a great place to start.
Yeah. Oh, that's so epic. Well, lastly, mate, if there is some professor out there that wants to take you on, how can they get in contact and chat to you more about that sort of stuff?
Just find me on Instagram, Daniel Moffatt Martin. Reach out, send me a message, and I'm always happy to connect and build my network. But also, anyone that's just asking, general knowledge questions or anything like that, I'll connect with everyone and happy to chat.
Yeah, beautiful. Can't recommend his work enough, guys. Even your page, To The Edge, is still open, I think. You've still got some awesome content on there. So if anyone wants to jump on there and have a look through as well, love the work you've been doing with that. And as we've been chatting about, some maybe more exciting things on the way. So really appreciate your support here, mate, and your insights. Super, super valuable. Thank you, everyone, for listening. We will catch you again next week to answer more of your questions. Thank you, mate.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks for listening to another episode of the Flow Performance Podcast. I hope you enjoyed the chat and found loads of value that you can use to fuel more flow state in your life. If you did enjoy the content and want to support the podcast, don't forget to give it a 5-star rating, leave a review, or even better, share it to a mate, post it up on your Instagram story and tag Flow Performance Podcast. We really do appreciate any support in getting this content out into the world. So thanks again for tuning in, and we will catch you again next week.